All right, welcome to another episode of the Spin Doctors Communication Podcast. And today we're actually going to be doing something a little different from our usual sharing of case studies. We're actually going to be watching, and Bruce and I are going to be reacting to a recent presentation that I had at the City Council at Richmond, California. So, just for a little bit of context, the presentation is for an request for proposal. And one of the things I've been working on for the past year has been to incubate an organization that would help engage the community and get community to support and steward an arts corridor in Richmond's McDonald Avenue and 23rd Street. And so that process has been going on for over a year, and I've been able to work with a tremendous amount of community leaders and professionals and artists, and they do incredible work. And we developed this organization called the Richmond Renaissance. And so when the city came up with this bid proposal to do a strategic plan for an arts corridor, we applied our bid, and then the city requested us and another contractor to present our case. So, yeah, Bruce, do you have anything to say before we start this video and then watch my reaction? This would be my first time watching this video, so
Yeah, I would just say that, we talk about communications and framing and messaging. Most of the time, we think about it in terms of talking to the media, but there's lots and lots of different contexts. This is presenting a proposal, public testimony at hearings and things. The same skills apply to a lot of different contexts.
yeah. Yes. So in this video, we're going to see my presentation, but what we want to talk about is how do we apply some of the communication strategies that we use and yep, and having you see it in real time. All right, so let me see. How can I share my screen here? Okay, so my disclaimer is that the presentation was glitchy, but we'll get more to that a little bit later.
The presentation, meaning the visuals.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay. Has the time started? As soon as you start, okay. All right, thank you very much. Well, good evening, council members. My name is Ratha. This is my colleague, Kendall Johnson. We're excited to be presenting to you the reasons why we should be selected as the contractors for this Arts Corridor Strategic Plan. And one of the first reasons is that this city council really values community engagement. So when community members get together and they self-organize and they develop the strategies to impact positive change in the community, we believe that this council wants to support those efforts. And that's who we are. Next slide, please. The Richmond Renaissance is a collective of working professionals in multiple industries of the arts who are accomplished in their fields, who also care about the community of Richmond. We were the first ones to come up with this concept of the arts corridor. We were the first ones to reach out to the community members. And we have the existing work that we have done will be applied to the strategic planning process. And with the tight timeline that we have, it will definitely be able to be helpful. Next slide. Oh, can you go back to the previous slide? A couple of the other points for this slide is that we also developed an organization called the Richmond Renaissance that's fiscally sponsored by the Independent Arts and Media. They're a fiscal sponsor agent that has helped with other arts and supporting projects. And the reason why we did that was because we wanted to build community with this arts corridor project. So our organization is intentional about bringing together art organizations to collaborate on this arts corridor. All right, next slide. And during our outreach, we've been able to connect with community organizations across the designated arts corridor. And these connections will be really useful in being able to do outreach and get feedback. And this is feedback that we've already been getting. We've also been featured in the East Bay Express and continue to get media interest. And we've also cultivated relationships with funders and getting funders really excited to support and see what comes out of this strategic planning process and support the arts corridor. Next slide. We also have identified the area and used that in our conceptual framework, and it's something that the city has been using as well. And we've also reached out to these organizations to become anchor institutions of the arts corridor. So we're really thinking long-term about how to develop an arts corridor that's community generated and community supported, and where the community has a chance to steward and support this initiative. Next slide. One of the other benefits is that we've already done a lot of policy analysis on the city and how it relates and research for the strategic plan. One of which is identifying the ARPA funds as a funding source, in which I know that there's a lot of conversation about that now, but also connecting the corridor to the Traffic Calming Arts Initiative. We have several former art commissioners in our group that can provide and advise us on the nuances of best practices of working with the city. Next slide. In between the last, the graphics are a little bit off, but in between the last presentation that we had, we're completing a research report on urban greening and the arts corridor. So we reviewed the city's master plan on urban greening. We identified where that intersects with the arts corridor. And we want to make sure that the arts corridor has values in environmental justice and is part of the city's plan for a just transition as well. Next slide. Go back one more slide. Okay, all right, there's a slide missing in here. It's part of our conceptual framework. So through our outreach, we've been able to develop a conceptual framework and, just to give us a little bit of visualization. Just imagine if everybody's back at your homes, you're in your comfortable pajamas, scrolling through your phone, looking through social media, and you get an advertisement for a beautiful Broadway play, a theater, a musical, or a concert, and you think it's going to be in San Francisco, but actually it's right here at the Richmond Auditorium. Imagine walking right outside and the auditorium being lit up for a theater play, people buzzing around about a place where street vendors can come in and we can generate commerce in the community. And imagine walking off of BART and having your breath taken away by beautiful sculptures and paintings and murals that reflect the stories of our diverse community, that tell the stories of Indigenous people, of Black Richmond residents, of the Latinx community, the Middle Eastern community, the Southeast Asian refugee community, the LGBTQIA community, all reflected in our beautiful arts. And that conceptual framework is what we're going to use as part of our strategic plan, so community members build on it versus having to start from zero. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Kendall, who's going to talk more about community engagement.
Thanks for that amazing introduction, Ratha. As you mentioned, our neighbors' stories and passions are what's going to bring this world-class arts corridor to life, making it Richmond-powered, accessible, and making long-term residents feel at home, as well as making newcomers excited to explore our city. If you could go to the next slide. I am hoping to share why I'm so excited personally to work on this project. I'm looking forward to my commitment to uplifting marginalized voices in community engagement processes, as I've done with the 980 redevelopment in Oakland, with the using Black culture in East Oakland to uplift economic development, and even as a long-term advocate for permanently affordable housing in Richmond and visioning along the McDonald corridor with community members to activate accessible sites. And beyond that, I hope to expand my career-long practice in creative placemaking, a lot of which that has happened here in Richmond, and to do this in coalition with many existing organizations whose collective power will drive community support for this arts corridor development. And with that, next slide, please. Here you can see an overview of our core messaging. This will guide our group's approach to incorporating valuable input from community listening sessions. The framework will ensure that community feedback relates directly to critical aspects of development as identified by our collective, honoring and preserving Richmond's cultural heritage, elevating community arts access, and enriching our community's quality of life, building strong partnerships and collaborations between city departments, businesses, organizations, and individual artists. And with these tools, we are honoring the history and lived experience of community perspective and instilling effective ways to incorporate feedback into our strategic plan. Next slide, please. And here you can see in how we will approach community engagement as a group. We will have an online survey as well as canvassing the corridor. We will have several community engagement sessions co-organized by our committed community stakeholders. Our networks already have over 10,000 contacts in the community, so we can get the community outreach rolling quite immediately. And beyond that, we have a specific neighborhood council engagement, including exclusive office hours, as well as a presentation to the coordinating council. So this strategy, combined with our core messaging, is an effective community conscious way to incorporate the local vision into the Arts Corridor strategic plan. And I'll pass it back to you, Ratha. Thank you.
Yes, next slide. So the contents of the strategic plan, we'll be able to meet everything that the council is asking for: a policy review, the values and vision, priority projects, a financial forecast that uses comparative benchmarking for comparative corridors to set benchmarks on what's possible, do some bottom-up forecasting to determine and give us different options on a detailed look at what the financial forecast could be. What I really want to focus on is that the community engagement findings will be implemented into what we're anticipating a 3-phase plan, with phase 1 being quick wins, high return, low risk projects. So this is really transforming the visual aesthetic of the corridor as well as events and activities. Phase 2, improving existing assets, such as renovating the auditorium. And phase 3, capital projects, which is purchasing, repurposing buildings, purchasing land to be able to build mixed use business and affordable housing. We really want to make sure that affordable housing is incorporated into this arts corridor plan, because our values of development without displacement will drive us to work with anti-displacement groups to make sure that we're doing that correctly. Next slide. This is a list of existing assets that are on the corridor that we pulled up through the City of Richmond's GIS mapping software. And these are those assets that we would look for in phase 2 on how we can improve and incorporate them into the arts corridor and see what's viable. Next slide. Yeah, so the council is asking for a lot in terms of meaningful community engagement, policy review, financial forecasts, and being able to do all of this is a lot. And for us, I can speak for myself and everybody else here, we've donated a lot of our own time and resources into this effort. And so if this is where the city wants to start, we will enthusiastically meet this budget request and be able to make sure we don't go over it and get started on this project. Next slide. And this is a summary of everything, but you can move on to the next slide. And I think my last point that I want to make is that one of the strongest reasons why you should work with us is that you get to work directly with the community experts who came up with this idea, who are very well equipped to carry this idea out. Personally, for me, I'm awestruck every time I get to work with them. And it's incredible and inspiring to see what they have done and what they are going to do with this transformation. So as much as this is a contract bid for you all, it's an invitation for you all to join the community into developing this arts corridor and igniting a Richmond Renaissance. Thank you. All right. Yeah, so not my best work, but yeah, I think very appropriate to look through and to study.
Watching yourself is always painful, but it can be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is my first time watching it, and I can just like, wow, how my first reaction is like, wow, I really sped through that, and my nerves really showed out, and I think one of the things I always try to talk about in public speaking is like, you want to, the same way that you're talking to a friend about a place that you ate, that's kind of like the same pace and the same vibe that you should try to aim for in public speaking. But yeah, I was racing against the clock. I was trying to get through all my lines and everything else like that. But yeah. Yeah, Bruce, what are your thoughts? What were your thoughts?
So, while we're on the subject of speaking and rushing and all those things, a couple of thoughts. Uh, I agree, particularly towards the end, it felt like you were rushing, and when you're rushing, you tend to become a little flat and monotone, which isn't helpful. Um, so there are a couple of things I would advise everybody. One is in terms of nerves, particularly if you're not used to public speaking, that's natural. Um, it's not a reason to be upset at yourself, but you need to think about it in advance and think of whatever works for you to calm yourself. And for different people, that's different stuff. I don't care whether it's meditation or chanting a mantra or just taking a walk around the block. Um, but whatever relaxes you and calms you, do it. Um, Breathe. You know, we think of breathing as something automatic, and it generally is. But when you get nervous, you tend to breathe shallowly, and that makes you tense, and that doesn't help. Breathe. And one little trick that I've found that helps me is to think back to a moment in my life when something I did went really, really well. And just remember that feeling and let it wash over you. And then go out there and knock them dead. Um, in terms of the rushing thing, it, it's always difficult because there's always more than you want to say than you have time to say.
Yeah.
My advice to folks would be absolutely ruthless in cutting it down so you have a little extra time, a little margin of error. Um, Being brief, being concise is the hardest thing in the world. Um, there's an old line among writers that if I'd had more time, I'd have made it shorter.
Mm,
Um, you know,
yeah, it's a good
when
line.
in doubt, give yourself extra time. It will frustrate you because there will be stuff you wanted to say that you don't get to, but it will make a better presentation, as frustrating as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great advice. I will definitely incorporate that feedback. I could have done a lot more breathing uh, for getting prepared for that as well.
Well, and when you get caught up in the moment, it's easy to forget all that stuff. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
um, it's easy to just get into your nerves and the immediate, oh God, what am I supposed to say next? Oh, right, the next slide is, um, so the other thing is to, rehearse it a bunch of times. Get to the point that you're so familiar with it that you're not afraid you're going to forget something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other part was like I was when I saw the graphics glitch, and then that was like a curveball that kind of got thrown out that I didn't anticipate. And so yeah, so I did rehearse the presentation, but I didn't, to your point, I didn't give myself, me and my colleague didn't give ourselves enough time, that 30-second cushion. I was aiming for it, but every time I kept rehearsing, sometimes I get there. I could have done a lot more rehearsing, but it was a short turnaround. And even though it's a short turnaround, and for some reason this public speaking in front of the city council president, it just really got to me for some reason. It just like for because usually I'll do public speaking, and then especially if it's like to a regular audience, like it doesn't really phase me too much. Pretty natural at it, but for this particular reason, it just got all my nerves like really up. So it's also a good reminder, like to check in with myself, and then for viewers to check in with yourself on like how are you feeling? How nervous are you feeling? Do you feel nerves? And to really make a plan for that. So that's probably what I'm gonna do next time. Yeah.
I,
Do you have anything else? Yeah. What was that?
I was going to say, in general, um, having more practice public speaking, having more practice, even if it's not a presentation like this, if you could find situations in your life where you're in front of an audience, and just getting more used to that.
Yeah.
Um, I have a little bit of an advantage, I have to say, because, and I don't think you know this, Ratha, but another thing that I have done in my life at times is acting on stage. Um,
Uh,
and that gives you,
yeah. Sneaky.
you know, practice and used to being in front of crowds. where everything has to be memorized. So, if you screw up everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, let me mention one little actor's trick that's very useful in terms of public speaking. It's what's called pointing a line. And it means if there's something that's really important that you want to make sure people get, make it stand out. You do that by pausing just a beat before you say it, and then really hitting it loud and clear. So, for example, one of the things I one of part of my spiel when I do spokesperson training is to say good interviews don't happen by accident. They are a result of preparation. See what I did there? The introductory phrase I said in just sort of a natural voice. Then I paused and I hit the next part that I really wanted them to remember a little harder and really hit the key words. They are a result of preparation. And if you can find ways to do that, it'll make the key parts of the presentation stand out.
Yeah. 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 Good tips. Good tips. You got any more?
So, well, I think maybe now we can sort of circle back just quickly to the content,
Yeah.
which I thought generally was very good. You laid a foundation of basic values on which you built the rest of the proposal. In terms of the VPSA framework that we've talked about before, values, problem, solution, action, I think it was very strong. There wasn't really a problem statement, but in this case, there didn't need to be
It was
because the
implied.
city basically said, we need somebody to do this thing.
Yeah.
And your job wasn't to say that the thing needs to be done. It was to say, we're the right folks to do it. Um, so I thought that was just fine. The one small critique I would make would be, I think there were a couple of places where you could use more accessible, more emotionally resonant language. There was one point where you talked about transforming the visual aesthetic of the corridor. And, that's policy speak. And RFPs tend to be written in policy speak. And so you tend to respond to them in policy speak. But in giving an oral presentation like this, I would then follow that up with something more emotional, more everyday, transform the visual aesthetic of the corridor to make it a warm and inviting and welcoming place. Something that folks who aren't policy nerds can relate to. Because I bet not all of the city council are policy nerds.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I do know this city council pretty well, and I am pretty confident in their ability to analyze policy, and they've had a great track record doing so. I think what something that you said brought me back was as I was preparing for this presentation, I actually thought back to our first episode. In our first episode, when we analyzed the debate, the presidential debate, and one of the things that we talked about was like, they're not really debating, they're out there giving a message. And that was something that reflected in me in terms of my preparation was like recognizing like what you're saying, it's a presentation. It's not necessarily like a response to an RFP, which would be kind of really different, in other RFP situations, a lot of times you're just with staff, you've already been awarded the contract, and you are talking in that technical terminology. But for this one, it was an oral presentation, and I love the example that you gave in terms of like ending that sentence and maybe could using that pause and inflection there to bring in that warm, inviting space to really end with that too. But yeah, I think, and then also, yes, for the VPSA, I think this is also a great opportunity to look at how VPSA can be used in multiple situations and scenarios to also use as like a writing platform as well. So, as I was preparing for this, I had to lean on the strengths of our group and then figure out what were the values that the city council cares about because the problem's already like implied. Like that's why they put the RFP out. And then really just talking about the solutions, how we're the best ones for the solutions, and then really at the end making sure it ties to an action, but also putting a call to action there as well. And then also the other thing is like getting practice and feedback on that. So this was actually a reworked, modified presentation. I was asked by the city to create a modified presentation because my original one was actually much longer, had less visuals. It was 28 slides, had a lot of words, and it was very, very technical. And so they requested something a little bit more slimmed down. And then that in that process, in my presentation to the steering committee, they gave me a bunch of feedback as well. And so like everything combined was like I just had to crumple up what I had prepared and just toss it away, which is great because it's important that you get feedback, that you make yourself uncomfortable, and that you incorporate that feedback in it because it's for growth and to get better.
Yeah, let me double underline that because you get involved in creating something, and you get so wrapped up in it that it's really easy to lose track of how outsiders perceive it. Um, and so you have to get that outside perspective, and they'll notice things that you didn't. They'll see things that are missing. They'll see things that aren't clear. So that's a really useful thing. And also, I would say that also in terms of when you have content, when you have text, slides that have text on it, whatever, it's always better to have somebody look at it who was not the person who wrote it and somebody who didn't write it proofread the thing, because your brain tends to fill in the blanks when you know what's supposed to be there. So getting a fresh set of eyes whenever you can on anything you create is always helpful.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about this? Otherwise, I think if folks want to know the results of that night, we were
Well, I think we're good. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a good weekend. Except I guess most people won't be seeing this on Friday, even though we're recording it on Friday.
we are
But
recording.
it's Friday for me, and that's all I care about.
Yeah. All right, Bruce. Yeah. Well, we try to record on Fridays, so we make sure like, this is, all right.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
All right. Thanks, Bruce.
All
Appreciate
right.
you.
See you in
And
a week.
yep. See you next time.